Did you always want to be a successful entrepreneur when you grew up, but instead of growing up, you just grew out? Well, not to worry. You can still have a lucrative career in public service. I know your love for the people is overflowing, but before you can take care of them, you need to be able to take care of yourself and your friends. So you're gonna need a couple $100 million before you can get started doing your actual job of working in the interest of the country. Think of it as your signing fee. If Ronaldo can get signed for $100 million, surely your talents are worth a lot more. We don't need to look too far away to learn how to land the wonderful deals that can get you to this number. Our own public servants are among the greatest in the world for this category. So sit back, pay attention, and appreciate the true works of art our elite have produced for us. Wait, what exactly is a bond? I'm glad you asked. Let me tell you. Government needs a lot of money. Private banks and companies have a lot of money. The government, through the central bank, takes money from these companies when they need it and pays it back later when it matures with interest. This agreement between the one who is giving the money and taking the money is a bond. Decide who gets the bond, companies bid in auctions, and the best offer that meets the conditions set by the central bank gets the bond, and that's sweet interest payment. Now let's find out what happened.
Name of the game, move the money from your client's pocket into your pocket.
Right. There was an auction by the central bank to sell treasury bonds conducted on the 27th of February 2015. This was to raise funds for state expenses. During this sale, the amount of the bids which was acceptable increased from 1 billion to 10 billion rupees. It increased at the direct request of the central bank governor. This was after his attempt to go all the way up to 20 billion met backlash from his staff. The primary dealer at this auction, called Perpetual Industries, bought nearly 50% of the bids that were on offer. They were able to do so as other dealers who came for the auction were only prepared to bid for the initial 1 billion. PTL later sold these to the Employee Provident Fund, raking in profits of over 12 billion. These profits came at the cost of the life savings of private sector employees. 12 billion in today's market can get our MPs 800 Prado SUVs and 240 units from the Monarch apartment complex for ministers. There were several issues with this purchase. The amount of debt accepted by the central bank through the sale was 10 times the amount that was previously communicated. The interest rate decided upon arbitrarily was much higher, 6.5%, than indicated previously at 5%. This raised the level of debt. The bonds that were sold were to mature after 30 years, meaning taxpayers would have to pay 100 million rupees for every 1% increase in the interest rate. Perpetual treasuries had conducted themselves in a suspicious way. They happened to arrive at this auction prepared to bid for bonds worth 10 billion, and even in a position to get Bank of Ceylon to bid 3 billion on their behalf. They had to be confident that the bid was much higher than 1 billion, as they had offered a high interest rate which would not make sense for this smaller amount. The price of bonds tends to go down as interest rates go up. The central bank issued a press release on the 24th of February 2015 stating interest rates would remain at 5%. PTL sold large amounts of bonds at a high price since the market was unaware of the increased rate. The week afterwards, when the interest rate went up, they bought bonds at a much cheaper rate, making more profit. This pattern of activity gave reason to suggest that insider trading had taken place, resulting from them acquiring privileged knowledge from the inside. Governor of the central bank was Arjuna Mahendran. Mahendran was appointed by the Prime Minister at the time, Ranil Wickremesinghe. The owner of Perpetual Industries was Mr. Arjun Aloysius. Mahendran was Arjun's father-in-law. These are the events that led up to the sale. Ranil Wickremesinghe took his oaths as Prime Minister on the 9th of January 2015. He proceeded to remove the management of the central bank from the portfolio of the Finance Ministry, assigning it to one under the PM. Arjun Aloysius resigned from PTL on the 16th of January. Arjuna Mahendran was appointed as the governor of CBSL, recommended by the PM on the 20th of January. The Treasury requested central bank funding of 13.5 billion rupees for the month of March on the 20th of February 2015. The Public Debt Department of CBSL announced a Treasury bond issue of 1 billion over 30 years on the 25th of February. There was a meeting between Ministers Ravi Karunanayake, Kabir Hashim and UNP Chairman Malik Samaravikrama at the central bank. This was to discuss how to raise an urgent 15 billion funding requirement for payment to highway contractors. On the 27th of February 2015, Governor Mahendran walked into an operations meeting of CBSL officials uninvited. He directed the officials to increase the bank interest rates from 5% to 6.5% with immediate effect. This was contrary to their previous press release. The bond auction took place on the 27th of February from 8 am to 11 am. At the end of it, the CBSL front office informed the tender board, which was to approve the transaction, that bids under 2.6 billion were to be accepted. At 12:30 p.m., the governor walked in to inquire on the offers. There were bids that went as high as 20 billion, all coming from PTL and BOC, who bid on behalf of PTL. He ordered the front office to accept all the offers. After the officials resisted, he continued to insist and they decided to recommend 10 billion.
Oh, it's between you and me, had the governor walked into the department and told, take this bid, take at this level. What you were?
වගේ මට කතා කරන්න බැරුව ඉන්නවා මේ විශ්වාස කරනවද මේ
මේක මාර ෂොක් එකක් මාකට
ඇයි එහෙම කරන්නේ ඉතින්
ඉතින් සාකාල අපිට උත්තර කිව්වත් ඩිසිෂන් එක ගන්න යානේ.
The tender board met on the same day and approved the sale. These events sparked several inquiries. The Committee on Public Enterprises carried out investigations, after which a special 3-member presidential inquiry committee was appointed by President Maithripala Sirisena. This commission decided that Arjuna Mahendran was guilty. Suddenly, Mahendran went missing, and after constant assurances from the Prime Minister that he had not fled the country, it was found that he was in Singapore, where he remains to this day. There were also concerns as to why the EPF was not a primary dealer like PTL at this trade, and they had to buy through PTL, even though it was a state institution. The purchase of these bonds came as an obvious loss to the fund, yet it was approved by those who managed it. On the 5th of February 2021, former Finance Minister Ravi Karunanayaka and the owner of PTL, Aloysius, were charged as the minister had solicited a bribe from Mr. Aloysius. The two were later released on bail. At the time, this was slated as a scam of the decade. Little did we know, there was a lot more efficient work to come in the very near future. On the 10th of October 2020, the government decided to ease the burden on the common man by reducing the price of sugar among other commodities. The tax imposed on a kilogram of sugar was reduced from Rs 50 to 25 cents. This reduction was in place for a period of 3 months, after which it increased back to 40 rupees. During this window, there was a significantly large amount of sugar imported by some companies with close ties to the government. One in particular, Pyramid Wilma Trading, accounted for 40% of all imports during this period. During this time, these importers continued selling sugar to wholesalers like Lanka Satosha at the previous price of 120 rupees while paying nearly nothing in tax. They were able to do so as they had stocks sitting in their warehouses waiting to come to market. The levy is not acted upon until it gets released. Consumers did not enjoy this tax reduction. Besides the loss in tax revenue to the government, Lanka Satosha also had massive losses by purchasing sugar at higher prices wholesale than they could sell at retail. The finance ministry revealed that the loss of revenue from this 3-month period was nearly 20 billion. These techniques have been crafted into repeatable templates by the real OGs of the game. Imports for coconut oil also increased a dramatic threefold from 2019 to 2020 by, you guessed it, Pyramid Wilma. Sri Lanka imported $25 million worth of coconut oil in 2019, which increased to $107 million for the year 2020. A vast majority of these imports happened in the month of July 2020, when, just like in the case of the sugar tax, the tax on coconut oil imports were removed suddenly. The massive amounts of coconut oil imported during this short tax break is in the range of 20 billion. This has caused the state a similarly large loss of income. Now, who benefited the most from these losses? At the center of this scandal is Mr. Sajjad Mohammad Mauzoon, the owner of Shangri-La Hotels. His company Wilma Trading imported nearly 200,000 metric tons of sugar between November 2020 and February 2021. This is about 1/3 of the country's consumption for the year after His Excellency President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's government slashed the taxes. Interestingly, Sajjad Mauzoon provided the Shangri-La Hotel to His Excellency President Rajapaksa during his election campaign. The president hosted many Vyatmaka events free of charge at the hotel. As with the Treasury bond incident, the timing of these events that led up to certain familiar parties getting a great deal is uncanny. But then again, maybe it's a coincidence. There have been no repercussions for Wilma Company or Mr. Sajjad so far. Some claim that true losses incurred by these incidents is 10 times that of the bond scam.
Right now, දූෂණය කියන්නේ මුදල් ඉපෙව්වා කියන කාරණේනේ. ඒක හොයන්න හරියම පහසුයි. අවුරුද්දක් යන්නේ නැහැ.
This particular bat scratching maneuver is an instance that has been made public knowledge. It doesn't take a vivid imagination to see an exchange of value taking place. What is not always so clear is, if you know what you're doing, the election campaign process can be used to launder illegal funds, abuse state resources, buy media support, and purchase favor from certain candidates and parties. So far, Sri Lanka has no restrictions whatsoever on the amount of contributions that can be made to parties or candidates, or in the spending of it. Measures have not been taken so far to seriously consider rules for transparency in this regard. This provides an obvious edge to certain individuals with promising connections and loose morals. So if you ever wondered why the same set of close to death aged individuals were getting recycled across political parties and contesting in elections. This is why pay-to-win strategy is effective in a country like ours. Ridiculous practices such as vote buying are not unheard of. There is also no legal framework in Sri Lanka that obligates political parties and candidates to disclose the cost during their campaigning. Many candidates are often given office on a platter due to this absence of regulation. There's a lack of credible data on the actual costs, the sources of funding, and the implications campaign financing has on governance following the elections.
Pepe Sylvia, this name keeps coming up over and over again. There is no Pepe Sylvia.
Like the video if you're enjoying it so far, and if you aren't, let me know why in the comments. If you want to know why you should select Sri Lanka for your next money laundering operation, subscribe to find out.
Ground. It's the family name that lives on. It's all that lives on.
We don't do that here.
Moving on. Times of crisis, while disastrous to most people, can be a tremendous opportunity to treat yourself to enormous stacks of cash. Don't fret, you earned it. At the start of the pandemic, the government launched a program to provide relief in the form of a monthly allowance worth 5,000 rupees to households that were badly in need of help. Nearly 7.5 million people were selected as being eligible to receive this allowance. The government allocated more than 50 billion rupees to pay the allowance for the months of April and May 2020. People from many areas in the country, including Hatton, Mattavala and Mathura, have confirmed that they have not received this allowance. They also identified local authorities who had been given control of these funds with little to no oversight on how this distribution was being carried out. So even the officials who couldn't make it to the top of government can still find little side hustles to scratch their itches. The generally poor handling of the COVID pandemic by officials is not exactly a point of contention at this stage. The sheer numbers of cases and deaths speak for themselves. One of the many factors contributing to our astounding death rate is the delay in obtaining vaccines during the early parts of 2021. The obvious choice of vaccine for Sri Lanka at the start of the year was AstraZeneca. On the 23rd of January 2021, a day after 500,000 were donated to the country by the Serum Institute, following approval from Sri Lanka's National Medicines Regulatory Authority, authorities found themselves in a position to secure as many as 10 million more doses of the vaccine from the Serum Institute in India. Instead of immediately placing the order for 10 million vaccines, the local agent for Serum Institute was replaced by the State Pharmaceutical Corporation under false claims that the institute wanted to deal exclusively with the SPC. This delayed the process of obtaining the vaccine by a whole month as the procurement needed to be restarted. Cabinet approval for this purchase was received on the 22nd of February 2021, a whole month after the NMRA had granted approval. Following this, the government only managed to secure 1.2 million doses of AstraZeneca until July 2021. 500,000 of these were bought, the rest being donations. This was because of unavoidable circumstances such as a fire at Serum Institute and the mass spread of COVID-19 in India. This failure to act fast and decisively with thousands of lives at stake was not questioned too hard due to these unforeseen events. The death toll we are seeing is a reflection of this failure. While this was taking place, on the 8th of March 2021, the NMRA told the government it couldn't get approval for the Sinopharm vaccine since there was no WHO approval or data available on its efficacy and safety at the time. The same day, the State Minister for Pharmaceuticals sacked 4 members from the board of the NMRA. A week later, the chairman of the NMRA, Professor Asita De Silva, resigned. It is plain that there was a lot of pressure placed on the NMRA to approve Sinopharm at this time. For over 2 months, Sri Lankan authorities were not able to procure vaccines from anywhere. Under new leadership, the NMRA approved Sinopharm on the 7th of May and began importing it in the following weeks. The price of a dose was $15, nearly 3 times the price of a dose of Covishield, and a lot more expensive than Sputnik V, which is under $10. It's baffling that Sri Lanka, which enjoys a long, intimate, and mutually beneficial relationship with China, could only secure a price of $15 when other countries such as Bangladesh and Nepal got it for $10. Disclaimer: this is not a dismissal on the efficacy of the Sinopharm vaccine. Health authorities have managed to roll out vaccines internally with commendable efficiency, and you must go ahead and get yours if you are eligible for it. This is a particular instance where the obvious explanation would be mismanagement or incompetence from parties involved. It's not always possible to tell the difference between whether there is foul play involved or whether it's another classic case of Sri Lankan officials being a set of inept buffoons. One must ask who, this being the status quo, benefits. At the start of the pandemic, the government initiated a fund called Itukama to combat the pandemic. They collected nearly 2 billion from donors, including citizens. Only 30% of this has been utilized so far, leaving close to 1.5 billion sitting in the fund. In the meantime, pleas are being made to NGOs to assist Sri Lanka with COVID relief. So where are these resources being utilized exactly? To provide oxygen for dying mothers or funding trips for ministers? We will never know the true extent to which profiteering was made until the end of the pandemic, if ever. The previous instances mentioned have had a certain air of complexity to them. Care and time have been taken to plan things in a way that was not that obvious to the average citizen. While subtlety and staying under the radar follow the sound principles of corruption, every now and then it's important to make statements about just how much power you have, to remind everyone who is boss. Misuse of authority can go all the way to the top of government.
We were accused of certain things those days, and we need to rectify them. There was a lot of corruption allegations against us. Although most of them were baseless allegations, we must make sure they're not repeated.
Also among those pardoned was death row inmate Thuminda Silva, who was convicted of murder and unlawful assembly.
When the judiciary saw fit to put a man on death row, His Excellency showed grace and mercy. If this is not a gross misuse of authority, I don't know what is.